Okay, and it has a lot of good things like accurate assessment, definition of education, early intervention, which is going to be really important because I would still consider, even though a child is turning 3, it talks about that year-round services. And I think one of the truest things in here, it says that fewer than 10% of children with autism have appropriate services. It's probably even lower than that. It's probably 5%. I don't know what Catherine Lord is considering to be appropriate. Okay, and then also this 2 to 3 months. If something's not working for your child, do not hang in there. Do not let it try. And you can have a basis for this in the NRC report. So this is all stuff that you can download to reference at your IEP. So the other thing that we're going to turn to is, let's see what page we're on. Oh my. Is page 61. Hit the deck running. Now the thing about working on this section, oh, you're just going to put up there? Okay.
Yeah, I got it.
Is what we're trying to do is pull together all the information that you've already had and make it specific to what it's like if you have a child who's turning 3 years old and is transitioning to the school district. So we're going to we'll probably repeat some things, but some of this stuff. You know, what might be, do you want to start with the question that you had before that you had asked?
Yeah, as far as the assessments that are in place prior to doing your IEP.
The question is, should I have assessments in place prior to the IEP? Well, that depends. And that's sort of the typical lawyer response depending on the situation. But you could, if how old is your child? 2.5, okay. You may not necessarily be able to, in fact, it's unlikely you'd be able to get the district to fund the cost of those assessments. And because the district is already doing its own evaluations, you may want to wait if you'd like to try to get funding from them. You're going to have assessments from your, did she have an early intervention program going on right now?
Yes.
Okay. But and are they planning to report on her progress?
They're doing some things, but I haven't been very happy with them.
Okay, all right. So the school district is going to do their evaluation. See, I'm a little torn on this with parents because I hate to see you spend $10,000 on assessments that's not really recoverable until you formally made a disagreement with the district evaluation and you've told them you're seeking an independent in one or more areas at district expense. So it could help you be more prepared for the IEP to have independence going into it, but it's also on your dime. So that's, well, I'm not talking about insurance. I mean, it depends on the policy. Your insurance could cover these assessments, but I'm a little bit leery to say go down the list of the providers on your insurance list and pick somebody off that list because that person may not have a very good understanding of how to develop an appropriate program in that area. They may be following more of a medical model, and who's to say they just really understand the IEP process well enough to make a recommendation that the district would feel was adequate, and even just be able to put something together that you could use in the future to substantiate your position. It's just real tough. I find parents that say, hey, I got my list of psychologists that the insurance company provided me, and who should I choose? And it's not really the best place to start. I think the best place to start is talking to a parent network, going perhaps speaking with other parents who've used in person, who've used independent assessors, maybe even scanning some of the prior due process decisions in your district to see who's been testifying for parents and find out who's winning on these due process hearings and what is credible or what your hearing officers are finding credible about their testimony. These are the people that you may want to contact. And so even though insurance could be a source of funding, you also have to be aware that some insurance policies have lifetime benefit caps. So every time you tap into that for something that's arguably educationally related or educationally necessary, you're depleting that lifetime benefit. So you might have a finite amount of money that's available under that policy, and again, it's very individualized. I don't know who your carrier is and what the policy says or anything like that, but it really depends. Yeah.
Okay, so the thing that I'd want to comment on that is, too, it also depends on your school district, okay? So let's just say you're in a school district that, as a typical rule, does a really crummy job of assessment. And you could find that by talking to the parents. They're going to do a bad job of assessment. Their assessment might be a paragraph long, you know, whatever. In those cases, I would not do anything ahead of time. I would let it happen. And I would never say, I'll tell you what, if you don't give me this is I would not give, I tell parents, don't give any clue that you know anything. Just let the whole process happen. Because if you want independence later, okay, then you're going to have a basis for it. However, if you were at a really big school district that had very sophisticated staff and nothing you're going to do is going to change how they're going to prepare, then in those cases, okay, then parents do prepare. Because they know that that IEP is going to be critical and they might as well hit the deck running at that first one. So it comes down to sizing up your opponent that we talked about earlier. And then you also mentioned insurance. You know, the quality of that often depends on what we're talking about because we have kids with such different needs. For some kids, depending on what they have, insurance can be okay for certain things. For occupational therapy, it might be okay. For speech therapy, one thing you want to do is understand how your state agency works, okay? Because you want to see, is this something your state agency? Because what you want to do is to make your pocket the last one that gets used, okay? Now, it depends on your insurance. Some people have insurance where they're all, yeah, well, it would cost me a $10 copayment to go get that speech eval, and I'll just see what it's like. And in that case, I'd say, what the hey, why don't you go ahead and get a speech evaluation? But you should keep in mind that at your IEP, they're not all that interested in diagnoses or evaluations from medical people. But physical therapy, you might be able to get something, or even occupational therapy might give you an idea of where to get started now, because if your child is 2.5, 6 months is a long time for a little person like that, okay? So that's, now in terms of psych, generally speaking, anything that your insurance cover is just not going to be educational. That person is going to make recommendations, and typically, those recommendations just say, oh, the school should consider blah, 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 and that is just so worthless. Because it takes me and your IEP team about a millisecond to consider something that I'm never going to do, okay? So those are some of the considerations. But like Tim said, your parent network, if it's going to be on your dime or the district's dime, you still want to make sure that it's the best ever. The other thing to remember with your insurance is a lot of insurances will only pay for a speech evaluation once or once a year. So you do want to make sure you're using the right person because you might find out later that maybe your child has apraxia or dyspraxia, something that you're really, or maybe a central auditory processing disorder, and now you know who you want to go to. Those are all the things to kind of balance in terms of using your own money and resources.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. If they're going to adopt the recommendations by your current providers and you're happy with that program, right, that's wonderful news because if the school district is not going to do its own assessments and you've got a program that's working well and they're just willing to say, whatever you recommend, we'll go ahead and put that into place. Yeah, yeah, sure. Put it in writing. Yeah, send them an email saying, I understand that you have said this, and just, you know, because they're not going to send you a letter to that effect. I would, yeah. Absolutely. You want to gather as much information, data, assessments, whether it's formal or informal, progress reports, whatever you have from the existing program. If you think it's valuable, absolutely bring it to the IEP. That's a...
Yeah.
Well, they should be sharing. If this is part of an early intervention program, you don't have... You're on the voucher program, right? So there's no early intervention agency involved? Okay. So then you would need to let them know in advance that you'd like them to come to the IEP. Also let them know that if they can generate reports, maybe they won't do any formal assessments, and if they will, great, but if they can generate some reports that you can share with the team in advance submit those to the district in advance, all that information should be considered. They need to look at the big picture and figure out how is this child really performing in this current program, and do we really want to change it up, or do we want to keep the status quo, at least for a period of time? Because I have had some districts that say, hey, he's doing great in his current program with the current agency. If it's not broken, why are we going to fix it? We'll go ahead and move forward. It's not, every district is not out to get you, but I'd say, and cut services, but you got to be very, you got to be cautious about it. Do what you feel comfortable, but at the same time, take a look, make sure that you're gathering all this information and that you're giving them the opportunity to come to the table with hopefully something reasonable. Yeah. I know, and there's always the fear of the unknown, but it's good that you have this information. But see if you can get these people to come and give the district reports in advance and be familiar with the reports yourselves and talk to your assessors, these people, the current providers, and talk to them about what they're going to recommend and find out, are they recommending this because they feel it's necessary for your child to gain a benefit from his education? And if that's the case, great. I'd love them to say that on the record at the IEP. It's necessary for them to gain a benefit. This is not a discretionary program. We're not talking about trying to maximize the benefit here. These are services that are going to be required to ensure that child makes progress. If he doesn't receive these services, he'll either plateau or he'll regress. Okay? Yeah.
I live in an odd state, the only state that's left that doesn't transition until 5. So right before kindergarten.
What state is that?
Maine.
Oh, okay.
And I really wasn't familiar with the process, and I just came out of my first meeting, and I thought it was a PET, and they call it transition meetings, and I brought everybody from her team that currently saw her on my side, and it really torqued them off because it was most people in a PET, because she has a lot of things outside of school, inside of school. I've got her integrated in a public preschool with an ABA, it's a bunch of different things.
And this is all being funded by
Part of it's called
somebody else?
Development Services.
Okay.
Some of it's
Mhm.
funded, and I might pay some preschool tuition, but they pay for the aid and things. And they were the ones that scheduled a little short meeting for an hour. Well, we don't know how we're going to hear all this testimony, and blah blah blah. Well, the interesting part now is I was completely confused by the meetings. I thought we were working on goals and objectives for the IEP for her kindergarten that's coming up. And at the end, all of us said is, well, we're going to adopt her current goals and IFSP goals and objectives, and then we'll write her IEP goals in 60 days. But the program that she's at now, which is an ABA school, this is one-on-one instruction for half of a day, and then she goes to an integrated preschool with her aide for the other half a day, is not like the program that they have. They have the autism program that they set up in their
Right.
school,
Mhm.
and then they have a typical kindergarten, which would be, if you had an ABA support, could be similar to her pre-K program.
And that's what you want to consider first.
Yeah. But they said that they don't think she can handle it. The only thing the school has done is they sent their autism specialist, who's even not a certified ABA specialist, to her preschool and her ABA school to observe. I've got no written documentation on what she observed. And they
Did you
said
sign
no
an assessment
assessments.
plan giving
They
consent?
did no assessments.
Hmm.
None. Not a single assessment by anybody.
Okay. Did you sign a release? Any documents that you signed to allow them to start this process?
I signed a document that said that the current organization, the ABA school, can release their documents to the school. I signed a release
Okay.
that her current therapist could release their documents to the school. That's the only thing I signed. And for 60 days, and I'm like, so you want me to, on the first day of school, drop her off with no transition plan, never seen the school, and you're going to take the goals that she's got in place wherever she's at and do them in a completely different program. And well, we've been doing this a long time, and this is how it works.
Have you observed that program?
I have been there. I did. And the day that I went there was nobody even in the kindergarten. There was 4 kids in there, and they were all much older than what my daughter would be. And I think I heard the skinniest, and they probably should have told me they got 9 autistic kids coming into kindergarten this year, and they don't know what to do because we're in a school district that only has 2.5-hour kindergarten.
Well, again, we're getting caught up in what's available in the school district. Remember, let's help the school district think outside the box of what they currently have in the school district. She's currently attending a program right now. Is it more than 2.5 hours a day?
She has 8 hours a day.
Okay. That is an option to consider. If the school district can't locate, or if you feel that what they have available in their district isn't appropriate, then there's nothing that says the school district can't continue funding for her current program. Okay, that's entirely possible. The school district doesn't want to do that. They want to try to keep everything they can in-house because it's a lot more convenient, it's a lot less expensive to do it that way.
But what about not? Shouldn't they have assessed her or done something?
Absolutely, they have a duty to assess in all areas of suspected need. So if they haven't done any evaluations, are they planning on adopting assessments from the early intervention agency or the school she's at or somebody? Because gosh, they've
They're probably a year old.
they've breached their duty to child find. They have to assess, identify areas of need based on assessments, have a meeting, IEP meeting, to discuss the results of those assessments, and then make an offer of placement and services based on those assessments if they deem the child eligible for special education.
They don't do that until after 60 days of kindergarten.
There's nothing in the law that says that. Nothing in the...
Because if they don't know the child will
Okay, but remember, you have
Yeah.
to understand why they do that. See, if you agree to that, people give up whatever they had before, okay? And in your case, it's kind of tricky because this whole transition to 5 years old, I'm not used to that. But the thing is, it creates a stay put. Okay,
Well-
that becomes her stay put placement if she does it for 60 days, right?
Well, with the district it does.
With the
With
district
the
it does.
district it does. You won't be able to keep the stay put, the
Right, I know
transition.
that.
You don't have a right to keep a stay put on your early intervention program anymore.
Right, I
unfortunately.
know that.
Yeah.
But the thing is that remember what I talked about earlier, the other thing that it often does during that 60 days, it gives an opportunity to create data about how this is the best thing ever for her.
This is
Okay.
this is another one of those policies I was talking to you guys about. I don't know if districts are going to create these policies and tell parents, look, this is what we do in our district, and this is, this is the kind of the steps we need to go through in order to make you an offer. And I'm not aware of any federal guideline, any statute that says they got to wait 60 days to do an evaluation. Are you talking about, the only exception would be if you were talking about doing an assessment of her in her current placement after you've signed an assessment plan. If they're saying she needs to be placed in our program, we'll evaluate her in our program for 60 days, then they violated their duty to appropriately assess her and make an offer of placement based upon those assessments.
Just make a request in writing that they should probably assess.
They need to comprehensively assess her in all areas
Well, I brought up a
of,
functional
sus-
behavior
of,
assessment.
of suspected need.
But it wouldn't necessarily be to her advantage to have them do that, right? Because then she
Well-
could ask for independence if they're going to proceed without them.
Well, you could do it one of two ways. It really depends on how the school district's going to react. If they do the assessments, if they refuse to do the assessments because you don't place her in the program or they won't do them until she's there for 60 days, then you can tell the district, look, unless you do these assessments, I don't feel you can make an appropriate offer of placement. As such, I'm going to get independent evaluations. I'm going to have private assessors evaluate my child, and I'm going to seek reimbursement for the cost from you. Because you're in a bind with the school district that is refusing to assess, but at the same time it's a procedural violation for them not to assess. Or, if they decided at some point to do the assessment, they may well come back to you and say, fine, we'll do the evaluations, you don't have to place her, because they don't want to get caught up in the independent assessment process, before they've had a chance to see her. They don't want your private assessors to have the first bite at the apple, so to speak. But if they do that, then again, you can establish, if you disagree, that you need independent educational evaluations. There's not a bright line rule here because we're talking about something that's very fact specific. Okay, so you have a right to get the assessments. If they refuse, I would just give them notice that you're going to proceed with private evaluations if they refuse to assess.
And I wouldn't
Yeah.
place her there until you're completely comfortable with that. I mean, sometimes districts act like, the world's going to end if the child doesn't start school on the first day. What would happen if she didn't? What if school starts in the fall, you observe it, determine whether or not you have confidence in that placement for your child, and then you decide whether or not she goes in that class based on what you said it's going to be in the fall.
You understand that districts sometimes make rules as they go along. depending on what's convenient for them.
Not only that,
They-
but
they-
create a process that forces you to do
Create a
something
process that
wouldn't
you can
otherwise do.
never comply with, or you comply with, that you're trying to change it up a bit. They come up with another process that you have to comply with. It's not based in any law. It's not even based in any district policy. It's just sort of,
I hired an advocate that was supposed to be one of the best, because I don't know, I didn't know the state law was different. We had recently moved, and this is supposed to be one of the best advocates. And he's telling me that we have to, because it's only a 2.5-hour kindergarten, and they gave her 6 hours, that I should be ecstatic. This was the first.
Well, how many total hours per week would she have?
She would have 30 hours in their program, and
but I want to,
because of the district that I was in, because the kindergarten's only 2.5 hours a day, he said, I've never seen him offer anybody 30 hours of kindergarten right out of the gate.
are they making a recommendation? Well, let me ask you this. Let me clarify. Are they saying they're going to make the IEP offer, then she's going to be placed in the kindergarten, and then we're going to complete the assessment? Or are they saying, we'd like to place her in kindergarten for the purpose of doing an assessment? Are they making the,
They
okay.
just said that they were, and if
They're going to make the offer?
IEP, they
Okay.
just said that based on the they call it a transition meeting.
Mhm.
Based on the transition meeting, the team has recommended, because of the severity of your daughter, to increase the kindergarten length to,
Did they
6
put it
hours.
on an IEP form? They call it an IEP? Okay. What they might be doing is they might be trying to do a diagnostic sort of placement and do an assessment at the same time. So they put your child in this diagnostic placement for the purpose of assessment, and then they want to come back. But all this has to happen, I guess, well, your state before she transitions, before that transition cutoff. And so are they going to have enough time to do that? When did she turn 5?
She's 5 in February.
Okay, so they already blew that timeline.
Yeah, and so you
Okay.
can, in the state of Maine, until you are kindergarten age, you can stay in early intervention all the way up until kindergarten. So
Okay.
she doesn't get cut off at the age of 5. She stays in her early intervention until she's, like now she's in the fall, she has to go to kindergarten, so she ages out at the end of the summer.
But on whose tab? Is it the school district's tab or is it the agency's tab, early intervention agency?
Ages out of child development services, what it's
Okay.
called. She ages out of
At
child
5?
development services, not until the first day of kindergarten.
Okay, and that could be after
That'll
5.
be September, right after Labor Day.
Okay, interesting.
No
Well,
matter if she would have turned 5 in last November, she
Mhm.
still would have aged out. the first-
Sounds like the best thing that you could do is access your local parent network and find out who is the good special ed attorney in your state.
advocates, I think they have some limitations.
Yeah.
I mean, even Lynn is not an advocate for pay or for hire. She's somebody that does it as a volunteer thing, but she's going to come to a special ed attorney and she's going to ask, and oftentimes it's me, she's going to ask, does this make sense? What would you advise this person? So I think that it's going to take, it might take somebody more than an advocate. I don't know your advocate. They could be the best in your area. I don't know anything about them, but you know it's a little confusing based on the facts that I'm hearing. Why would you want to consent to a placement that could potentially become a stay put, that you could be locked into, and just for the purpose of doing an evaluation? That just doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense.
They said, well, no, if she regresses, we'll reevaluate.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Yes, I
that
heard it.
districts always say that. We'll have another IEP, and we can all come back, and you can get the services back. Or we'll
One-
talk about reinstating her program.
One general rule I have for whether you need an advocate or an attorney, advocate does not cut it if you want a program that your district does not typically offer. An advocate is to help you, at least in my opinion, to enhance a program, make it better, help you at the IEP. But if you want something either your district has never given to anybody or is really going to fight, you need an attorney for that. Hold on just a second. We have another person who hasn't had a question yet. Go ahead.
First question, you talked about showing that he has improved so much with this one therapy.
Uh-huh.
My problem being that, okay, let's say ABA, he's 2.5, he's at ABA since he was 2. That's the only therapy he's ever had other than speech and OT. So how do I show that he does better with this therapy than what they're offering him?
You know, that would take an expert to say, like you had someone like Dr. Perlman who could make a generalization, because what he'd be saying is children who are like this, and I've seen about 80 children, or whatever the number is, like this. in this. And kids who are like this need this kind of program. And I have observed this other program. And typically, children like this, their needs will not be met. That is an inappropriate placement. So in that case, that's what we'd have to do if your child has never, because we wouldn't want to do what your district is probably going to recommend, like she just said. Well, why don't we put it in if he severely regresses and you're about to have a nervous breakdown, we might consider to do something else. But with a little guy like that, we're not ever going to be able to get back that time.
I guess my fear is when I went to them at our transition meeting and I said, this is where he's at in an ABA program, this is what I want for him, they said, what's ABA?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a red flag.
Where do you live?
I live in down by St. Louis.
Okay.
And it's not a small town.
Yeah.
Apparently that's the first of that, and they want to make
Sure.
it
That's when we start importing services into the school district. If they can't offer it, or they don't understand it, I would be leery of letting them experiment on your child with a program that they call a FAPE.
Now, see, the chances are, if they said that, they're not going to do good assessments.
And that's where you really need to let them do their assessments, then get an independent or multiple independent assessments. You know, if they do speech and language and OT and they, psychoeducational and a behavior, they're not going to do a behavior eval. Unlikely they do it if they don't know what ABA is.
Yeah.
Then you would disagree and you would get all these people, including we recommend a behaviorist. Okay? So you have a basis for your position and you have somebody that can help you, if you have data in existence, to interpret that data for the IEP team. So they have a better understanding. Because we've been in lots of districts that, don't, especially some of the rural districts in California that don't understand what ABA is. And we've been instrumental in helping to import a lot of these services into the district. A lot of agencies have come from Northern California, from Southern California, and are, have now started to establish programs, and the district then becomes more familiar with them. But yeah, your district is, even though you're saying it's not a small town, they're still years behind a lot of districts. Years.
So is your state agency willing to continue any part of that program beyond the third birthday?
No, and the state agency does not pay for the ABA.
Who pays for it? Oh, you do.
State agency said we don't have anybody that does it, there's nothing else we can do for you.
Okay.
And I let it go because I'm like, it's
Well,
going to take
Okay, that's something that you still might want to explore.
Right.
Okay, is to find out, read up, again, access your parent network, find out what everybody gets. Actually read the statute that funds that state agency. What are they mandated to do? And since your child is close to transition, you go back to my original advice for people with agencies, is get connected with them and identify for them and help your behaviorist help you all of your child's non-educational needs. Because you're saying, I want it now, and I want it on a going forward basis. Because you're going to have to read whatever that mission statement is, what they're supposed to do with people with developmental disabilities. And generally, they fit into those three categories of health, safety, and self-help. So you'll have to identify everything your child can't do or anything crazy or unsafe that really scares you about your child and say, this is what I need help with. And the more specific you are with the state agency, the more likely you are to get help. Because if you just say, I want ABA, that's really easy to say, go talk to someone. We don't do that. But it's very, very hard for them to walk away with you when you say, I am so scared that my daughter, or do you have a daughter or son? Son, that he could get killed because he elopes in parking lots. He dunks his head in the toilet. I can't leave him alone with the baby. He doesn't know hot. He climbs on the stove. I can't make dinner. All the things that really scare us about our children. And then when they suggest to you, well, why don't I just send you to a parent training session? That's when you're going to have to say, I'd love to, except I'm going to have a nervous breakdown. I need one-to-one services so that I don't lose my mind trying to do what you're supposed to provide a therapist.
And we're absolutely not telling you to make things up, but
No.
come up, go through
You don't have to make stuff
and
up.
list things that you're concerned about your child, and make sure the state agency understands, because not having anybody available is not a good reason to deny services.
Because we could fly an agency in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
just like we can import all kinds of agencies
There are
to provide
agencies
services.
that have offices all over, like CARD, who have agencies all over the world. Okay, you just have to figure out who will come. But in your case, you already have a program, so that doesn't really. That's not the same case.
What
If
are
you,
some of those agencies? What are some of them? I know CARD's one of them.
CARD's one of them, but you know what? Don't start with the ones who already do it. What you got to do, access your parent network like I did, and just frickin' get on the phone and talk to people. That's what I did. I just got out there. I mean, the first agency I got, Tim got for me, okay? But after that, I brought 2 agencies to my area because I sent them emails, I called, I told them there's a huge pent-up demand in my area. These are all the reasons why. Let me set you up with our state agency. And I facilitated the whole thing. And they were kind of nervous, saying, are you sure? Are you sure that there's going to be enough kids? And both those agencies have had waiting lists since then because no matter what, there are so many kids that need to be served. You can do it for yourself and then start spreading it around to everybody.
And just
that you know.
5 years ago, these districts that these agencies are serving children in didn't know what ABA was either. They had no clue. And so they've since become a little bit more educated, and they'll probably in the next 5 years be the districts that are trying to set up their own programs, these model autism programs that I'd warned you about.
My other project did that, is I set our early intervention program up with the agency that we contract with ABA. But the problem is we're in Illinois, St. Louis is where all the ABA agencies are. They're 2 different states. So the ABA agency could not get all items within one particular item ABA therapist category. They only have a 12-month therapist category.
Okay. Again, then you need to go, there's somebody who could help you through that, okay? And it's going to be in your parent network because you're not the first person. And Illinois is a pretty big state to not be able to do that with having a city the size of Chicago in it. Somebody has overcome that and figured out a way to make that work. Because, I mean, I'm not saying that it's impossible that you're the first parent, but in a state this size with a city this big, I'm really doubtful.
There's a lot of resources in Chicago that we're not willing to try.
Okay, I know that's why you have to set it up because nobody wants to drive to my town either because I'm in the middle of nowhere, okay?
You know a good resource to just, if you can't find a local parent network, go on the COPA website, Council of Parents, Parent Advocates and Attorneys.
But you know what, even just go to Yahoo groups and you
Yeah.
can find something in here and then work on it to find, because what you can do is you can do an out-of-area workshop and have, you know, an agency that comes in until they get enough clients to have somebody, and then they start hiring local people, and then it just grows, and finally have enough people to start an office. And the only reason I wouldn't say to go with someone like CARD, not that CARD's not good, is sometimes it's easier with the smaller agencies that are hungrier than it is with the bigger agencies that are not quite so hungry, because we've been working on a CARD office for almost 3 years, and if I had held my breath, of course I'd be dead by now, okay? So it worked better to go after the small agencies that were I happened to hit the right ones that were ready to expand, and neither of them have opened up an office yet. Right now they still have the behaviorists coming in, and they've hired the local talent to actually deliver the services, and soon they'll be hiring, they've hired people so that soon they'll have their BCBAs who are actually living in my area.
Well, Chicago is so, the services are concentrated on this particular side of town. Like I live in a city, you have to go to the north side or the south suburbs to get anything. You ask them to come and work with you, they'll come to the city, work on the south side. And so there's basically nothing really in the city of Chicago, at least the south side.
Well, then you may want to consider, I mean, if that's a real issue and it sounds like it's a problem, you may want to consider taking your child and having a clinic-based program if it's appropriate. Because it could be. I mean, you talk to the agency, that's where we go back to the independent expert. Once the district has done their evaluations, or you know, if you choose to hire private experts, private evaluators before the district does their assessments, you may want to go ahead and consider whether your child could benefit from a clinic-based program. We talked about the different settings.
We did that.
Yeah.
Our behaviors only came every 3 months.
Yeah.
And the rest of the time, me and my girlfriend did it together. And we hired our own tutors. We had our behaviorists who lived, 300 miles from us. And she came quarterly, and then we did phone conferencing. And she answered their question, and we videotaped the kids in their programs, and we went back and forth with the DVDs of, her watching a therapist with the boys, whatever. If you really want to do it, you can make it work for areas that people don't want to go.
Well, they call that a workshop program. I was talking about actually taking the child and having the therapy delivered in a clinic setting.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, so that's another option to consider. But Lynn is talking about a workshop where they supervise and train the staff that you hire, so they don't really come to your house to provide the service. They would come and be more of they would really take a supervisory role and a training role, and they would only come maybe once a month or once every couple of months. She was talking about how often did Anahita come out?
I think
Once
every 3 months.
Every 3 months? Okay. And she would send videos, and there's very creative ways that you can come up with
Now that they
to
have
solve these problems.
webcasting, it's so much easier, because like our agency now does a webcam, okay? So they can have the tutor actually working with Spencer. The tutor can have her little attachment in her ear, and the behaviorist can be talking to her, and she doesn't talk. She'll like say things as if she's talking to Spencer, and he could be none the wiser that he's on the webcam, and his behaviorist 200 or 300 miles away is watching him in that program. Because of technology, it makes it a lot easier for someone to supervise a program in a meaningful way and be really far away. And it's really nice for people who live in farming communities like I do, who there's just no way that they can just go around recruiting people to run programs like Spencer has.
I want to go over the content that we have too.
Okay.
So you have your booklets. Let's turn to page 61 so we can we review this. We don't have a whole lot of content, but I want to make sure that for the people that have joined us in the back that we review that. We were taking questions that stemmed really from prior sessions. So how do you make a smooth transition from early intervention to the school district? Well, we had started talking about that in a prior session. Best way to prepare for an IEP is to understand the IEP process. What are the steps that go into developing an IEP? You need to start with assessments because you need to know what your child's levels of functioning are. Okay, you need to identify those clearly in the IEP. Okay, then we would start, that would determine present levels of performance. And we talk about goals. And we talk about placement and services. So that's going to drive, and that's all outlined in session 2. To prepare for the IEP, it's good to know your district really well. So the district you're going into, do research about this district. Google search the district. Find out what kind of litigation in special education they've had before. What are they fighting about? Are they giving parents ABA programs, or are they fighting with parents who want ABA programs? Do they have an in-house ABA? Did you have a question?
Yes, we had a question from someone on the web.
Oh, okay.
This is pertaining to families that don't really have an English speaker, I guess, in the family.
Okay.
Two-part question. First one is, what advice would you give to family members where they don't really speak English? And second part of the question is, how should they go about being assertive and getting services for their children?
Well, the first thing is that a school district is legally obligated to ensure that you are participating in the IEP by providing a translator at that IEP. Okay, so they have a duty to ensure that somebody is going to speak your language in attendance at that IEP to make sure it's all translated. And they also have a duty to provide copies of assessments and documentation and other things in your native language. So it's absolutely appropriate for you to tell the district, look, English is my second language, or I'm not completely comfortable with English. In fact, that might even justify you recording the IEP by video. And there's actually some case law on that issue as well, whether you can take video of the IEP as opposed to just an audio tape. Because sometimes people that have, if we're talking about English as your second language, it might be easier for you to understand if you can see the person speaking as opposed to just listening to it. So that is, and the second part of the question was?
How do you go about being assertive?
How do you go about being assertive? Well, I think it's important to understand the process and know what your rights are going into it. Okay, and again, the district has a duty to provide you copies of all documentation in your native language. So you would get a copy of your parents' rights in your native language, but don't just rely on that. Make sure that you're looking, that you're doing research, and there should be, and I'm not sure which language we're talking about, but depending on the language, if we're talking about a less frequently spoken language in this area or in your school district, it might be more difficult for you to find information in that language. If we're talking about something that's maybe more common, let's just say in our area in California, Spanish is a very common second language. So you'd be able to find lots of information and resources in Spanish, but you may not be able to find a whole heck of a lot in Portuguese because we have a smaller group of people who speak that language, or in Italian or something like that. But it is the district's obligation to ensure that you're meaningfully participating in that process by providing you documents to start in your native language. And don't let them take 6 months to get you copies of reports and assessments. Let them know that you need it. in advance, and in order to meaningfully participate. And if they need extra time, just let them know you're willing to wait reasonable time to get those reports, but that you expect them to follow the guidelines, the timelines for convening an IEP, for completing an assessment. It shouldn't be an excuse that they can't have the IEP or they can't get it done in time because they don't have a translator. There are people, they can find people, they can fly people in if necessary to ensure that you're participating and understanding this process. Okay.
But some things are the same for the people who have, it's relatively easy for me to help parents who speak Spanish. Obviously, I live in California, and I can connect them. I recently helped a mom who spoke Vietnamese, and that was a lot harder because I really had to search around to find somebody who could do a conference call with us who was fluent in Vietnamese and knew all the special education terms. So one of my advice would be for someone like that is to actually do the same thing that the other parents do, is to access a local parent group and specifically ask, can you find me another parent who speaks Thai or Vietnamese or whatever that language is that's not commonly used in your community?
Okay. So let me go on to pre-prepare for the IEP. It's important to understand your district. Are they paying for ABA programs? Are they using an in-house person to provide behavior intervention services? Are they contracting with a consultant through a reputable company that provides these services? You need to know where they stand. Okay, if you're coming to an IEP and all they have, they don't know what ABA is, and they have a school psychologist that didn't assess behaviors, then I think we've got a district that's that's less savvy and understands the process and understands their obligations to assess in that area less. So you might have to do more legwork on your own. In fact, it's likely that you will. You're going to have to, get involved, talk to parents, find out how we can get assessors that understand ABA involved in your case, have them do the evaluations, and then be prepared to present them and actually educate your school district. Unfortunately, there are school districts that, like we ran into in Central California, quite a few of them that just didn't understand what these programs were. What was all the hype about ABA? We've got plenty of special day classes for these kids. Why can't we just put them there? And it was an education process, and stepping them through, why is it an effective method of intervention? And really almost a training process, And it was like sometimes, in many cases, we had to drag them kicking and screaming into the 21st century, so to speak, to help them to understand this. And now we finally, even though begrudgingly school districts in that area are paying for ABA services, we finally have at least have an understanding of what this entails and what they're going to have to do to get services in place for these kids. Whether or not they agree to it, they understand it somewhat, better than they did 5 years ago. Next point, go the IEP open-minded, but expect district to offer cookie-cutter programs and services not tailored to meet your child's needs. It's always important to participate in the IEP, but ask lots of questions. You don't have to make any commitments at the IEP. Just make a list, and that's one of the reasons why I encourage parents to get the assessments in advance. So you can go through, and you can make your comments and put your questions in the margins of the assessments, and gather your thoughts in preparation for this meeting. So when you come, you're ready to say, okay, I got 20 questions for you. Let's start. After they review their evaluation, this is what I'd like to know. What is your basis for this recommendation? Tell me about this methodology that you say could be effective or that you use in this district. How do we know that that's necessarily going to be appropriate for my child? What about that is going to help to remediate this deficit? Okay, so just be prepared to ask lots of questions, to enter into discussion, but you don't necessarily have to make commitments. In fact, I encourage you not to sign consent to the IEP on the day of the meeting. Take it home, think about it, talk to family or friends or an attorney, an advocate, somebody you trust, and help them have them as an objective third party help you go over this stuff, because it's a very emotional, stressful process, and sometimes it's hard to think straight, especially when you're there on the day of the meeting. Something might sound real good, and then invariably I have parents and clients that wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning after they sign the IEP and go, my gosh, I missed this. This is huge. How could I not ask this question or include this as part of the discussion? And not to say you wouldn't then be able to go back and revoke consent, because you can, as long as that program has not been implemented by the school district, and it's unlikely if it's the next day it will already have been implemented. But it's still going to be a little bit, it's much more of a hassle to do that. You got to write a letter, you got to say, I'm revoking my consent, you're not allowed to implement these services, I'm going to take some more time to think about it. Just bypass that whole thing and take it home. Spend the weekend at least going over it and talking to somebody who might know more about the process than you and find out what their thoughts and opinions are.
The other thing that you can do to prepare that I've suggested earlier, especially for those who haven't gone to an IEP meeting, is again, access your local parent network and go to an IEP with somebody else. That could be the most valuable thing that you could do. It'll make you feel a lot better about the experience. You can learn quite a lot by attending somebody else's IEP in advance.
Don't have an unreasonable, the next point is don't have an expectation that we're going to get everything resolved at the first IEP meeting. If you do, that's great, but it's really not the norm. Most parents, if they sign the IEP on the day of the meeting, they're not going to be very happy a few weeks into it, or a few months, or in some cases, worst cases, I've seen a few years, they feel like they got the wool pulled over their eyes, and they didn't realize that what was offered them was not even remotely appropriate. It's just think of the initial IEP as a first step in a long discussion, in some cases a negotiation process with the school district. I'm not encouraging parents to negotiate in the IEP process. I want you to be clear on what your expectations are, if you know what they are, to the IEP team. But that doesn't mean that you can't step outside in a confidential discussion and negotiate with the school district as part of a settlement talk if you feel that you could get and make some more headway in that sense. So sometimes districts will hold resolution meetings even outside of due process to discuss your concerns. Certainly you have a right to call a meeting, an IEP, at any time to discuss your concerns, but just don't have an expectation you're going to get it all done at the initial IEP. It's just one step in the process. Second point, it's very unlikely the school district's going to offer you what you feel is appropriate on the first try, and in many cases it's because it's a very costly program for the district that you're looking for. So you need to show them that you've got some evidence, one, to show that what you're asking for is appropriate, and that you're willing to take it all the way if necessary. You're willing to file for due process if the district doesn't put on the table what you feel your child needs to benefit. It's important that they know that, because most parents will just walk away. They'll make you the same offer that they made the last parent of the child with autism, regardless of the child's needs. They'll make you the 20-minute-a-week group speech therapy offer. They'll make the autism-specific special day class offer, whatever your district's norm is, depending on what's available to them. But keep in mind, regardless of what's available, they need to consider your child's unique needs. So if they don't have it available, then they need to find it or pay for it, depending on whether it's available in the county or not, and helping them to locate something that could be appropriate is often a more effective way to resolve the problem a little quicker. Because if you tell the district, hey, you may not understand that this is available, but I made some calls, and ABC agency is willing to take on this case starting next month, and here are their rates, and I'd be happy to have you talk to Dr. Jones over there, and she's willing to discuss with you a contract with the district to get this going. So districts are not going to do the legwork. You're going to have to do it for them. We talked about waiting sometimes for the district to do its assessments, and there was a question about whether the parent should get assessments first or wait. You're really looking at cost, and that's going to, if you don't wait for the district to finish their assessments, it's real tough, if not impossible, to get funding for the independent evaluation because they didn't have the assessment opportunity first. You're really just, as a parent, you have a right at any time to get private evaluations, but it's going to usually be on your dime unless you disagree with some assessment the district has conducted.
Let me talk about the Miranda one. Are you down to that?
Okay. Lynn would like to talk about the Miranda point that we
I
made.
like this one, okay? Anything you say can and will be used against you, and I want you to believe that. Almost every parent who, for one reason or another, often parents, like you heard this parent over here talking about how she was going to request her files for the first time ever, okay? And she might get this big packet going all the way. There's hardly any parent who doesn't see notes that totally shocks them. stuff that they said that either is incorrect, that says that they thought that you said, or things that were really personal and you never ever thought that they would write it down. I remember when we did it, that, this comment like, Mrs. Arnold asked me this, and it was so hard to keep a straight face and answer her about whether her kid should go into kindergarten, because they thought that was like such the most no duh ever, and that was really rude. When you go through and do all that, you realize so many things that you didn't realize were being documented are in the notes, often personal information, or even, some of our kids talk enough to give personal information themselves about your family. Remember, you have a right to privacy, but that's only going to work if you actually enforce it yourself. Okay? So if you don't want to see comments that you've made in your child's educational record, don't give them that information either in writing or to say it to them, because you may find it later, because a lot of people don't, a lot of OT, speech and language pathologists, they don't realize that down the road, these notes could come your way. And actually, I've heard lots of parents say the most painful part about going through due process was having to read through all the notes that had been kept on them through the years, because they would have liked to have thought better of their school district than what they found in their child's records.
And that's what happens when I talked earlier at prior sessions about obtaining copies of email correspondence that's gone back between district staff members. And sometimes very hurtful things are said about parents in emails. And they don't expect that anybody's ever going to read that. Certainly they don't expect a parent to read it. And sometimes that's a motivation for districts to quickly resolve cases through settlement after the emails come out. So it's not said to make you paranoid about not speaking at all. You need to have communication with your teachers and district officials, but just be leery be aware that things you say could come back, and just be careful. You're not going to, they're not necessarily your friends, okay? Think of it like a business associate more. They really have a duty to your child. They're doing a job for you. They're going to pretend like they're your buddy, but you just got to be aware that even though the teacher may be sweet as pie, ultimately they're going to have to answer to their special ed director, and their demeanor could completely change at the IEP if they feel their job's on the line or a promotion is on the line. Okay? So. We talked about open-mindedness. One of the things you always want to do when the district makes an offer is, if you don't feel it's adequate, don't just don't just look at the IEP offer on paper. Go take a look at it, and take your notepad and take copious notes. Ask for an observation. Just say, you know what? I'm not going to accept your offer, but I'd be happy to take a look at it and consider it, just like a district would consider your independent evaluator's recommendation. So go out and take a look at it. And you may be pleasantly surprised. It's unlikely you would. I think what's really going to happen is you're going to be able to note items or areas of concern that you can come back and discuss with an independent evaluator and say, look, this is what I saw. And then you can send the independent evaluator back to see that program. Okay, so that person, it's going to be imperative. Again, when you're asking the school district to fund a program, you're funding a program on your own. If you don't feel that their offer is adequate and you decide that you want to seek reimbursement, you've got to give them notice, and then the burden is on you, if it ends up going to due process, to prove that the program offer they made is not appropriate. It's really tough to do that if you haven't seen it yourself and you haven't had an independent expert see it, because you're just guessing. And the district will use that against you in due process. They'll say, how do you know? It's not to say that you have to have your child in the program. Again, you want to look to the best interests of your child. Is it going to harm him if he's in this program? Are you going to give up a stay put, a good program that you have right now? If you switch to something else, you don't want to give those up. If he was already in the program and you've gathered some good data, you might want to wait to take him out, because you need to have some information about why the program, in your opinion, is inadequate. And you need to have that through somebody credible, somebody who's got some expertise in that area. A behaviorist, a psychologist. If we're talking about a related service like speech therapy or OT, then you would have an independent in that area come and take a look at goals, take a look at sort of how the program is structured, take a look at the methodologies of instruction that are being employed to educate that child, to remediate those deficits, and have them comment out whether they feel they're appropriate or not appropriate. So it's all part of it's an information gathering process, and just plan on having to be well prepared to defend your position.
You know, and at that time, that's also when you can get a lot of informal information. If you go ahead and observe that classroom, that's when you can ask the teacher, you know, what are some trainings that you've gone to, so that you can say later, not so much, I would never put my child with Mrs. Smith, but I need a teacher who has this, 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 and this. And then generically describe the setting, okay? Not that you wouldn't, again, it's not all about Mrs. Smith's classroom or even their special day class. What you're really going to do is, let's just say you want private placement. You want your child to go to a private preschool. What you're going to have to do is describe what theirs is like and what your child needs, which can only be achieved even if so we're really talking about the Montessori school, okay? You don't really have any right to a Montessori school. What you do have a right to is a placement that's appropriate for your child. So if you can getting into generic, and also make you a lot more friends at the IEP, that you don't make anything personal about any of the staff that you saw, okay? So not so much they were trained, they didn't know what they were doing, but I asked them, have you done any ABA training? Do you know verbal behavior? Do you know floor time? So that you can say that those are the specific modalities or whatever that need to be used with your child.
And that's not to say that a school district administrator or staff member will not try to make it personal. You might have some people that really do take personal offense to you saying, I'm not interested in your special day class. They might question whether you think they're a good teacher. You just assure them it has nothing to do with their abilities. It could be, but you can just say, look, I just met you. I really don't know. You could be a great teacher. You could not be a good teacher. But based on what I see here, I don't feel this is an adequate program for my child. So it's not personal. Okay, so we're done with content. And what I'd like to do is just, we can just open it up for any remaining questions. Eventually, I think we're going to have to take a rest and get some dinner because we're about ready to collapse. I think we're tired. Yeah. Yes. Well, you need to find out if they really exist, first of all. And Lynn was talking about a good way to discover whether a policy that they say is in effect does exist. First of all, when they quote a policy to you, ask them to put it in writing. Just say, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that policy existed. Can you tell me where to find that? Or can you put it in a letter to me and attach a copy of that? I'd love to read it. Sure. Right. No policy. Well, then,
Sometimes you have to work your way up the chain of command. And I have gotten a lot of good information that way. And I just work my way up. And a lot of times, the higher ups will make somebody answer you because they don't want to hear from people like me. So I've done that at my local state agency.
Or they'll send you a letter saying, oh, you know what, there must have been a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that happens a lot with the state agencies. In California, our state agency that provides services to persons with developmental disabilities happens to be called the Regional Center, and we see that frequently because there seems to be somewhat of a higher turnover depending on the regional center with the service coordinators, or they used to call them social workers. And so you have a lot of people that tell you, I don't really know, but that's what my supervisor told me. And then the supervisor, you ask them, and they don't really know because that's what their supervisor told them. And they're not really sure and whether it's based in any policy. It might be just something that somebody told them off the cuff and they didn't really understand, and now it has become this policy that, sort of a feigned policy or a pretend policy that they have. And, you question it, and then it kind of gets everybody frazzled because, gosh, this is just what we've always done. Usually not. Yeah, typically not. I mean, I'm not aware of any circumstance that would allow them to make a policy retroactive, especially when you're losing or your child's losing some sort of benefit as a result of it. Yeah, I'm not aware of anything any law that would allow a state agency to do that, especially with respect to educational program and rights under the IDEA. Well, it would make it, if you're talking about a state that's funded through some federal program, then you could bring a claim in federal court. It'd become, we're talking about, if a state is using, pretty much every state uses IDA funds for special education. You've got federal claims there. If you've also got possibly Section 504 claims. Somebody had asked earlier in prior sessions about what is this 504 plan. Well, any agency or program entity that receives federal funding has to provide reasonable accommodations to a person with a disability. It just really depends on whether they receive funding, but there's a variety of statutes that would control, depending on the issues and the circumstances, if that agency received federal funding. And if they refuse to comply with that statute, then you would have a right of action, either administratively initially to do what the IDA calls exhaustion of your administrative remedies, or you could file an action in federal court if there's no exhaustion requirement, directly in federal court. Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question about what you guys' idea.
Okay.
For Exley School District, my son's going to be 21 in February of 07 or 08. Have they changed that to 22?
Well, it depends on what state you're in, because California's been 22 for a while, but where do you live? I don't know if Illinois has extended that to 22. I don't have an answer to that. But if you're a member of a parent group, an advocacy group that might be able to give you a referral to an Illinois attorney, or be happy if you pose your question to me by email, I'll see if I can find an answer for you. I don't know, because I'm only licensed to practice in California, and I have limited knowledge about state-specific law, even though federal law and the guidelines control, and California has extended the age to 22. I'm not sure about Illinois or other states. Sure, I'll give you, my email address is on the materials. It should actually, edattorneys.com, if you go to the website, you'll be able to there's a link to my email. Just find my name. I'm listed amongst the attorneys, and you can just click on my email address, but I'll give it to you for reference. It's tadams@edattorneys.com. T. Adams, my first initial, last name, @ed, as in Edward, David, attorneys spelled out ATTORNEYS.com. Okay.
So is that it for questions? Are we done?
One more. Okay.
Is there anything that you could do in a situation, we had a very novel situation last year where we got everything we wanted in the IEP after fighting like dogs to get it, including the right staff. And we had everybody on the same page except for the classroom teacher, the general education teacher, who was doing everything in her power to undermine the whole process. And she was quite effectively doing that. And including violating my son's privacy rights all over this, telling people at the school, telling parents, all kinds of confidential information. We wanted to be able to say to the district, we're going to take legal action if this continues. Because we worked through all the different avenues within the district to try to get this to stop. And they seemed to be afraid of the teacher, like afraid of the teacher union issue. They kind of weren't really resolving it. Are there any causes of action that exist outside of taking the school to court for failing to provide
Typically, you could file a compliance complaint because you have an absolute right to ensure that personally identifiable information is kept confidential unless you give consent to release it. So certainly, I would file you wouldn't have to go to court. You would file a compliance complaint with your State Department of Education under the IDA's complaint resolution process or various other statutes. You could even file a complaint under other privacy acts. I mean, Lynn was talking about FERPA earlier, but if you're just talking about special education specific, you have an absolute right to keep things confidential. So you file a complaint, there's an investigation that's had, and it goes above the school district. You're talking about the state agency that would do the investigation, or an agency contracted with the state. So you're not, you could file an internal complaint. It's possible to do it that way too. But if you take it above their head and say, I'm going to go state level because I feel that this, this needs to, you obviously have some sort of aversion to wanting to investigate this teacher, for whatever reason you're concerned, I think it needs to go outside your doors. It needs to go to somebody at the state level. So you don't have to.
Yeah.
You would go on the State Department of Education's website, and most state departments of education have a form, a complaint form that you can download. And sometimes they're fillable PDF forms, and you can, the laws are also listed, particular statutes, all that's searchable on the web. And for whatever reason you can't find it, just Google search. The web is a great resource to find information. So that's, if you want to avoid, like I said, having to deal with your district specifically, and of course avoid having to file lawsuits against the teacher. Certainly that may not even be cost effective, because it depends on how severe, what sort of damage has been done to the child, what sort of remedy you're seeking, and so you might want to start with the CRP process. Yep.
I'm fairly new to the IEP process as well, not brand new, but I've only had a couple of IEPs. And what I'm finding is that my son is making adequate progress, if not better than adequate progress, and I'm finding that services are being pulled from him because he's, quote, doing so well. What are some of my kind of possibilities for saying, well, I think he's doing so well because of the services
Sure.
in place, not in spite of him, let's take them away. That's the problem I find.
We can't start all over with those questions. We got to go.
Yeah, we're gonna take we're gonna take your question, and we've actually got to run, but that's a good question. I think that most parents don't understand that the district can't simply say, we feel that he's doing so well that we want to stop services without getting your consent to stop services. You have to provide your written consent for them to discontinue or change any service or any part of your child's IEP, whether it's an accommodation, it's a modification, it's a methodology, it's a goal, it's an objective, it's a service, it's a placement, whatever it may be. Any component of that IEP that is in place, they must have your written consent to change it. If not, they have to take you to due process to change it. And in most cases, it ain't worth it for them to file a due process complaint to prove that something is appropriate, not appropriate, if they want to reduce speech by an hour a week, because it's just going to cost them way too much money to have to handle that, to deal with it. So don't let them just say we're reducing it, and don't panic, because they can't take it away without your consent. And if they do, or if they try, then you file a compliance complaint through the complaints resolution process with their state agency to enforce your right to keep the status quo. Now, oftentimes we'll call it a stay put if it's in due process, and we use that term loosely. I think people understand that I'm keeping the same program, and we call that a stay put, whether it's in or it's out of due process. I mean, there's some debate on whether it technically applies when you're not in the due process setting, but regardless, it is the status quo, and they can't change it without your consent unless they have an order from the hearing officer. So, but thank you very much for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you at tomorrow.